Have you ever wondered in Warhammer 2 battles at what point the game decides who wins? One side will inevitably get the army losses penalty, routing their entire army off the battlefield. This does make you wonder what exactly caused your army to run away, because sometimes it happens sooner than others. Well, it all comes down to the mystery of CP. What the hell does that mean? Well, let's get into it. So, CP, what does it stand for? Any guesses? Cold pigeon? Cat party? Chicken porn? Well, if you said any of those, you're a bit strange. But if you said combat potential, you'd be onto something. It's kind of a strength score that is applied to every single unit in the game. The stronger they are and the more damage output they potentially have means a higher CP, more combat potential to do damage. And there are two main types of CP, melee CP and missile CP. Pretty much all units have melee CP, but only those with ranged attacks will have missile CP. Let's look at a few examples. Here's a few melee only units and their melee CP. Great Swords 900, Dragon Princes 1400, and a Feral Carnosaur 1600. If you know Total War Warhammer 2 well enough, you may have recognized that this is just their price in multiplayer or custom battles. So with most units, if you want to know what their base CP is, go and look in custom battles. In campaign, units will rank up and get buffs which will increase their CP. So in campaign, it's hard to nail down what exactly a unit's CP might be. Not that it necessarily really matters, it's pretty obvious. The more expensive a unit is, the more damage it's going to potentially do. However, a unit's CP is only at full strength when the unit is at full health. As it loses HP and models, the CP goes down. So you can expect a unit of Great Swords at 900 CP when fresh. When it's at half health like it is here, it's probably gone down to around 450 CP because it has less combat potential, less damage output to give because it's half dead. So for melee units, their combat potential is directly linked to how much health they have left. The better shape they're in, the higher their CP. Now, missile CP units work slightly differently. They do have melee CP, which works the same as regular melee units, but they also have a missile CP, which is linked to their ammo. So Rattling guns here, they only have 80 melee CP because they're pretty useless in melee, but they've got a big old lot of missile CP at 770. Shades, they have a good bit of both. They've got some decent melee CP because they are alright in melee and have some combat potential there. And they have the armor-piercing ammo, so they've got lots of missile CP as well. Artillery, like the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, works the same. It's useless in melee, so only has a bit of melee CP. Its main combat potential is in its missile CP. Obviously, it's an artillery. Now, ammo usage and its effects on CP is where things get interesting. Cast your eyes to this graph here. Along the x-axis on the bottom, we've got the percentage of ammo remaining. On the y-axis vertically, that's how much missile CP you still have. When a unit has 100% of its ammunition, or 90, or 80, or 70, or 60% of its ammunition, it's still at pretty much full 100% CP. It stays at 99 point something through all of those numbers, gradually declining but only ever so slightly. When you hit around 55% of missile ammunition left, this is where you really start losing CP. As you start to make your way to around 40% of your ammunition left, then you will have seen a decline to around 88% of your missile CP. Then you get quite a sharp decline. Using the last 40% of your ammo really reduces your missile CP, slowing down a little bit in the last 20%. What this tells us is that if we stop using our missile unit's ammo at around 55% ammo remaining, we can keep our missile and melee CP pretty much at full strength, provided the unit is undamaged. Ammo dies with models, so if your unit loses half its health and half its models, it also loses half of its ammo. You'll understand why this is all significant in a minute. So missile units can output damage and make themselves useful and still maintain a high CP. Let's take Thunderers for example. They have 210 melee CP, 490 missile CP. If we use up 45% of their ammunition, leaving us with 55% remaining, we'll probably see a CP of around 210 to 487, a small decline for the used up ammo. So Thunderers can still maintain around 700 CP whilst putting out a good bit of damage. If we think about the same thing with a melee unit, take Longbeards for example, they have a melee CP of 700. If they lose 45% of their health, they're down to around 365 CP. They have to use up their CP to do damage and make themselves useful. Which is fine, that's what melee units are supposed to do. Dive into combat, take some damage and put some out. But this really highlights how important good matchups are with your units. If these Longbeards fight goblins, they'll have no trouble with them, they'll make good use of themselves, they'll lose a bit of CP, but they'll take away a lot more CP from the enemy. If they fought Chosen with great weapons, well, that's a bad matchup for them. They'll get absolutely destroyed, they'll lose most of their CP without really taking too much away from the enemy, thus not really making themselves useful. So we've got missile CP and melee CP. There's also extra CP for Lords and Heroes, with their abilities, spells and items. They'll have melee and missile CP like all the other units, but for every ability or spell they have added onto them, that will add extra CP to the unit, making them more valuable, giving them more combat potential. One of the most expensive CP units in the game is good old Manfred here. If you whack him on his zombie dragon, give him all of his spells, items and abilities, he comes to a whopping 4,000 cost in multiplayer terms, which if you play by normal multiplayer rules at 12,400 funds, that's a third of your funds on one unit. That's a lot of CP in one place. If you were to lose him, it's pretty much game over. And he's probably worth even more in campaign. So hopefully now you have an idea of what CP is. Melee CP, missile CP, CP on characters. It's just kind of a strength score that shows how useful a unit can be on the battlefield at any given time. You can pretty much track it by how much the unit costs. And if it's a missile unit, more of the CP will be on its ammo more than anything else, although if it's alright in melee and it can do some work in melee, it'll have a bit of melee CP as well. So you understand this? Now let's get to the important bit. Why does all this that I've been blabbering on about for the past 5 minutes even matter? It's all about the army losses penalty, minus 120 leadership, which is enough to make any unit rout off the battlefield permanently, causing an army to lose, with the exception of unbreakable units who will keep fighting to the death. So at what point does the game decide somebody's getting this army losses penalty? Well, there's 2 criteria that have to be met before an army can lose. Number 1, the losing force has to be down to 22% of their original army strength. That is, their CP. They have to be down to 22% of whatever their starting CP was. As long as an army is above 22% of their original strength, they cannot lose. So that's simple enough, right? Just beat the crap out of your enemy until he's 78% less strong than he was at the start of the battle. So that's criteria number 1. Criteria number 2 is that a winning army has to be 2.6 times stronger than that losing force to be able to get the army losses penalty to kick in on their enemy. And again, this is all talking in CP, so if a losing army has 1000 CP, you'll need at least 2600 CP to be able to get that army losses penalty to kick in on the enemy, provided that 1000 CP is 22% less of their original strength, of course. Now, if we think about this in the multiplayer world where things are a bit more controlled than in campaign, a 1v1 battle being fought on large funds gives both armies roughly a CP of 12,400. To beat the opposing army down to 22% of their original strength to potentially make them lose, you have to get them down to 2,728 CP's worth of units. And if you wanted to beat them as soon as they hit that number, you would have to maintain a CP in your own army of 7,093 or above. Now obviously this is much easier said than done, and very rarely will battles end at this point. And this can be the reason why some battles go right down to the wire with only a few beaten up units left on each side. Both armies can go down below 22% strength and be potentially ready to lose, but until one of them goes 2.6 times stronger than the other, nobody wins. Allow me to give you one more illustration to make sure this is clear. Let's say we've got one army which is a ranged army and a second army which is a rush army. They come into a battle with roughly the same amount of CP. The battle begins and the ranged army stays put, using its artillery to blast away at the rush army, taking off some of its CP by damaging its units. The rush army frantically moves forward, trying to close the distance so that they don't take too much damage. They eventually start to get hold of the opposing army and begin doing their damage and reducing the enemy CP. They have at this point lost a fair amount of CP themselves though. Alas, the poor old ranged army hasn't protected its ranged units and artillery very well, and thus they're all getting routed off fairly quickly. And now the tables begin to turn. The Rush army quickly smothers the ranged army, wiping out a lot of their units and bringing them below 22% of their original strength. The ranged army is now in danger of losing the battle, but the Rush army isn't 2.6 times stronger yet, so they haven't won. They keep pounding away on that ranged army though, dropping their CP rapidly, eventually hitting a point where they're 2.6 times stronger than the ranged army, and victory. The Rush army is able to win because it hit the 2 criteria that it needed to win. It didn't quite drop below 22% itself, so it was never in danger of losing. So hopefully with this information you understand a bit more now how to win a battle, what it is you're aiming for and what you're trying to do. Does it change much though? Is there anything you really need to think about with all this information? Well, maybe. It may not seem like there's much use for some of this information. You can still play your battles as you normally do. You don't really need to think about CP too much. However, there are some things to think about, specifically to do with ammo. I did myself a little bit of testing. I brought a mirror-matched high elf army of 5 units of spears, 5 units of archers, 2 units of cav and 1 eagle. What I tried to do here is pressure the enemy archers to make them useless and get them off the battlefield with the cav and the eagle. And then with my archers, I used around 50% of their ammo and then stopped them firing. They weren't allowed to use any more ammo than that, around 50%, and then they were done. They were going to sit the rest of the battle out and hope that the rest of the army could win it while they just sit there and look pretty. The idea of this is to maintain a high CP. As we know, missile CP stays pretty high, above around 55%, so we're not going to lose much CP from using that ammo, and then we're just going to keep them safe, keep the ammo safe, and this will help keep our CP higher for longer. All we've got to do then is hope that our cav, eagle and spearmen can sort out the rest of the enemy army. You can see this unit of archers here has used about 50% of its ammunition, so I'm just going to turn it around, take it off fire at will, and it's just going to sit the rest of the battle out. And that's what I'm going to do with all of these missile units. All the while taking out the enemy missile units so their CP goes away. Now as things have worn on here, these 4 units have used their 50% of ammunition, so they're not firing anymore. Or this one is firing at some routing units because I forgot to take it off fire at will. But for the most part, they've still got half of their ammunition left. I've routed off all the enemy archers and I'm beating them down, and eventually a close victory is afforded to me. This seems to be significant in the fact that it's a close victory as well. Now where it's interesting is if we look at the enemy army losses. I killed 453 of their troops before they routed and ran away. You can see on the unit cards we didn't have to kill that many of them to get them to lose and run away. And we didn't have too many losses ourselves because they ran away seemingly early. And then I did exactly the same test again, except this time I didn't conserve my ammo. I tried to keep my missile units always firing so that they would be using up their missile CP, using up their ammo. So in theory it would be harder for me to maintain a higher CP for longer. So later on in the battle, all of my archer units are down to around 25% or less of their ammunition. Some have been a little bit hurt, which hurts their CP even more, and I found that the battle is taking a hell of a lot longer. I pretty much routed off all of the high elf units now, except for the Lord. So even though it looks like I've got loads of units left now, most of them are archers with little ammo, so they don't have much CP, and the Lord's able to hold on for a good while. I get a close victory again, but the kill difference is pretty huge from last time. I had to kill 745 elves this time to get rid of them. Before it was only 453, so I've had to kill about 300 extra elves to rout the enemy off. I've also got bigger losses as a result, because obviously the battle has gone on longer. So it seems if you conserve your ammo around 50%, you'll be able to win a battle sooner because of your higher CP. I also did a little more testing with some other factions against the same high elf army. This is the Skaven here, and they were able to get a close victory, killing 545 when they conserved ammo. And when they didn't conserve ammo, guess what? It came down to the Lord again. Everything else got routed off, the Lord hung on for a while, but this time it resulted in a Pyrrhic victory, and I had to kill 700 odd troops, just like I did before. So the same findings. When I conserve ammo, I can rout an enemy army off sooner. One more test with the Empire. The first run I'm conserving ammo and we got ourselves a close victory, having to kill 437 of the elves to get them routing if we're conserving ammo. And when I didn't conserve ammo, I had to kill about 600 elves to get them routing, so a smaller difference there, but still a couple of hundred elves. So from this we can conclude that if you conserve your ammo at around 50%, you could potentially bring a battle to an end a lot sooner than if you use up all of your ammo. Which is surprising, right? You think that the more ammo you use, the more damage you do, the quicker you make the enemy run away from all that damage. But apparently not. Now, whether conserving your ammo is a good idea or not is really going to be a situational thing. If you're losing a battle, you probably shouldn't stop using your ammo. This is really only something you can do if you're winning or if you feel like you can win with the rest of your army. So you can use the first 50% of your missile unit's ammunition, and then if you feel like you're in a good spot and that you're winning, you can stop using the rest to bring about a victory that little bit sooner. If you're losing though, you'll probably want to keep using your ammo to help turn things around. But really, this can apply to anything bringing a lot of CP to your army. If you've got big expensive units like a Dragon Ogre Shaggoth here, the longer you can keep him in good health, the better he's going to serve you as you get towards the end of the battle. That is, making yourself 2.6 times stronger than your enemy is a lot easier if you've got a full health Shaggoth than if you've got a nearly dead one. So naturally, we need to try and keep our elite units alive and in good health as long as possible to help us win a battle sooner. And on the contrary, we need to take out the enemy's expensive units as quick as we can to bring their CP down sooner. Now this is stating the obvious, but it's interesting to think about when we think in terms of CP and how that 2.6 and the 22% all comes into play. Now let's finish up with a few other random things on the CP subject. The first one is all about routing. When a unit gets broken, routed and runs away, but still has the potential to come back, its CP gets halved. So for example, let's say a Carnosaur at 1600 CP gets beaten down to half health and then routed. At half health it would be worth about 800 CP, but because it's been routed, it's gone down to about half of that, which is 400 CP. So routing a bunch of units at the same time could give you the potential to bring an enemy's CP down low enough to make yourself 2.6 times stronger. Maybe. And when a unit shatters, that is, its flag turns white and it runs off forever, that unit's CP turns to 0, as you might expect. So that could be an interesting thing to play around with. If you can time the routing of your enemies to all sync up together, you could bring yourself a sneaky win. Now when it comes to campaign, of course there is no limit on your army in terms of CP. You can fill it up with all the most expensive units, giving the army a really high CP. You can see the upkeep of this army is 12,000, so naturally when I go into auto-resolve, I've got so much more CP than the enemy does, thus the auto-resolve is heavily in my favour. Although that's only one small factor of auto-resolve, it's not entirely dictated by CP, but that's a whole nother story for another day. This is what contributes to doom stacks and also missile spam armies being quite effective for auto-resolve. Now, have you ever had some chosen for the chaos, and you've seen on their unit card in leadership that they have a faster and stronger enemies nearby leadership penalty when they're fighting high elf spearmen? Which makes no sense, right? Surely a massive chosen could crush any single high elf spearman in combat, no problem. Well, he absolutely can. But CP of units does stack up in small areas. So when chosen are fighting high elf spearmen, times 3, those high elf spearmen units at a cost of 500 each stack up to 1500 CP. The chosen only cost 1250 CP, so they're a little bit less, and thus they are fighting a faster and stronger enemy nearby, -4 leadership. That's another thing that CP is affecting. When you've got a lot of units in one area, their CP is all stacking up to face the amount of CP that the enemy has resisting against you. The bigger the gap in the CP, the bigger the leadership penalty for the losing side. Until things get turned around, inevitably these chosen are beating the crap out of these spearmen, the spearmen are routing, the CP in the area is going down, and the chosen are feeling a lot better about themselves. They don't feel like there's faster and stronger enemies nearby because they're beating the crap out of them. Another thing to consider when putting your matchups together on the battlefield. So stacking a whole bunch of CP up in one place can have its advantages. And the bigger the disparity between the two CPs in the area can make that faster and stronger penalty even bigger. So goblins with a CP of 300 times that by 5 brings you to 1500 CP are as scary as a giant that also has 1500 CP. So just another thing to think about, if you maybe saw an enemy army running towards you with a lot of CP all in one place, you may want to try to match that CP so your units don't get too overwhelmed. Just another part that CP plays on the battlefield. So there you go, the magical world of CP and its effects on Total War Warhammer. While a lot of this information isn't really necessary to know to be any good at Warhammer, it does give you a few ideas for things that you can take advantage of. And maybe, just maybe, you can give yourself the upper hand in a battle. I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching, I will see you in the future.